Hello everybody, this is Jan for Chess24. Welcome to a new installment of my opening show, which we call Jan's Opening Clinic. The way this works is we publish an article on chess24.com, and there Chess24 premium users can leave their questions, which I will then try to answer according to the best of my knowledge in a bunch of shows. Normally we try to do around 10 per show, and this show I guess is going to take around an hour, but we'll see how it goes. Let's jump into the questions and see where it takes us. The first question by Mr. Proustiskeen, tough question already, is saying, what's the theoretical status of the 4d takes c4, knight f3, c5 in the Catalan? Is there something else currently working better for black? Second part is tough to answer, so let's start with the first one. D takes c4, knight f3, c5. It's a very forcing line, trying not to really give white a chance to breathe and get into the game. An approach which I have some sympathy for. But yeah, what we're talking about here is d takes c4, bishop g2, c5. There are other somewhat more established mainlines like bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop e7, or bishop e7, which I made a video series about. I believe are still slightly rank in popularity above d takes c4, but both of those give white somewhat more options to keep pieces on the board and play a bit more slowly. Therefore, dc4, bishop g2, c5 is a very valid attempt to force the matter. And the current theoretical state, as far as I know, is it's fine for black after castles, knight c6. The problem and the reason why a lot of black players don't like to go here, at least not consistently, is that after d takes c5, you will be fighting for a draw without really any winning chances in an end game, which can be achieved and should be achieved with correct play. But in this line, this is the main line, something along those lines. It looks like black is perfectly fine because of the weaknesses on the white kings, on the white queen side. But white does have a small initiative because his pieces are more active. And it is black that has to be careful here. The main line, I think there's a lot of games here nowadays go something like this, knight to b5. Knight takes c6 has also been played, but knight b5. b6, knight d6, takes, bishop e8. Here rook takes d8 or rook to d3. When, yeah, theory is quite far advanced, and with some precise moves, I believe black should make a draw here without a lot of trouble. But that's the reason why it's maybe not everybody's cup of tea to play this dc4 followed by c5 consistently. My friend Jordan Van Forest, he lost the game here after rook d3. h6 in Vaikanze, where he made a lot of prepared moves, but then got into some trouble in an opposite color bishop endgame. I think knight to b4 is also very playable in this position. It should lead to a draw without any major complications. But yeah, this endgame is the reason that black players are not always happy to go for this. White has some alternatives along the way. I think knight fd4 we've seen played recently, and there are some other choices, but nothing that is causing a lot of theoretical trouble. There were also some games with knight f to d2 instead of knight bd2, trying to be very subtle and opening up this bishop immediately. But then knight fd2, knight a5, knight a3, takes, bishop d7. Black is also, well, he's alright, he's going to equalize. But you have to be ready to play accurately in this endgame if you want to include c5, knight c6 into your repertoire. White is not obliged to go dc5, there are alternatives. And every now and then you will see a super strong player experimenting with one of those, like I think we've seen Caruana play. Knight e5, bishop d7, knight takes c4, cd, bishop f4 recently. Was it against So? I can't remember. When, yeah, as far as I know, bishop e7 is leading to an alright position for black. But you have to know theory in these as well. So in general, it's a theory-heavy approach, where black has to know a lot. But if he does, the reward will be that white might just not get a chance to play a game of chess. So if that's your cup of tea, it's a very, very decent option. If it's not, then you're probably better suited looking somewhere else. There are other lines here as well. Queen a4 used to be the main move, but nowadays after b5, I think black is reasonably happy. But yeah, that is the problem, that there are quite some choices here for white. Knight a3 also exists. Theoretically speaking, as far as I can tell, outside of this endgame, there is nothing that should be too dangerous for black. So it's a very playable line, but it does require a lot of work, and the reward is equality, not so many chances. As for the alternatives, yeah, I've mentioned bishop b4 check and bishop e7 are still in very good health as well. Recently I've been intending to study this line, which Caruana played against Yu Yang. Haven't really gotten around to it yet. But yeah, the Catalan does remain a bit of a headache for d4 knight f6 players, d4 knight f6, c4 e6 players with black, because it's so popular and it's tough to generate winning chances. But in order to equalize, I believe this d takes c4, bishop g2, c5 is a pretty good choice still. So there you go. I hope that helped a little bit. Mr. Proustiskeen. Oops, sorry. Then, what do we have? We have Mr. Fyodorovich. Fyodorovich is saying, "Hi Jan, what is the current status of the line in the Saemisch King's Indian after d4 knight f6, c4 g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4 d6, f3, short castles, bishop e3, c5. It seems black is okay, so are the moves 6 bishop g5 or 6 knight g2 preferable or just different? Thanks." I don't know, is black okay? Like, in general, some more detail there would help me. If you think black is okay, then let me know where and why, because I'm actually not 100% sure how okay black is in that complex. Like generally, obviously black, if you look at any mainstream opening, will be alright in the sense that I don't believe main lines are losing. Even in the King's Indian, black is a favorite to come out okay. But I thought actually that things weren't all roses for black here recently after c5. So it's been established at this point that grabbing this pawn does not give white anything. Here after knight to c6, followed by knight d7, a5, whatever's needed, black does get full compensation for the pawn, so no one really goes here anymore. What people do is they play knight g2, keep the tension, and by far the main move in this position is knight to c6. cd4 transposed to the Marocci, but that's never been supposed to be an equalizer from black's point of view. So the critical move is knight to c6, and here d5, knight to e5, knight to g3 is where the discussions start. And I'm, yeah, as mentioned, not 100% sure if black is supposed to be okay here. The main moves are e6 and h5. h5 has been very popular recently, but after h5, bishop e2, h4, knight to f1. Things aren't so easy. There is this trendy move e6, which I think wasn't introduced by, but it got popular after Kasparov used this idea: e6, f4, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5. And I also saw a game, maybe Svidler Grishuk in this line, which I believe is considered to be fine for black. But after e6 recently, they've started going bishop to g5. After h3, both g takes h3 and knight to e3 do seem like things aren't so easy for black. Therefore, yeah, I wasn't sure in which way the black experts want to play this position these days. There are obviously a lot of alternatives. You can play e6, bishop e2, ed, cd, h5. That line has always been around. Short castles, knight to h7, with very, very complex play. But I do think that white keeps chances for an opening advantage in all these lines. Therefore, yeah, as mentioned, I'm not 100% sure how okay black really is. It's also, there is a reason that 3f3 remains very popular, and after bishop g7, people are happy to transpose back to the Saemisch with e4, while Grandmaster players usually go c5 here directly, which doesn't, or e6 followed by c5, when after d5 the position is somewhat different from the ones we just saw, because white had to go d5 without kicking the knight around. I'm not sure I'm making myself very clear. My point is, even in these positions, if you go d5, let's say e6, queen d2, ed, cd, this knight goes to d7, it probably does not want to jump to e5 on the very next move. So let's say whatever I play, knight g2, well here knight e2 might be a decent move. But the knight is not committed to go to e5 directly. While if you play the other move that we just looked at with knight e2, knight c6, after d5 this knight has no choice but jumping to e5. And it's not always perfectly placed here for these lines, or it's not always the priority number one. So I can't really claim to be a big expert or to know what people want here. I've noticed all kinds of ideas have been played here also after d5, knight e5, knight g3. Someone played e6, bishop e2, and b5, maybe ding. Which also leads to very complicated play. But once again, I was not 100% sure how okay black was. Here, white is a pawn up. The position is a mess. But it is a pawn. So things are certainly complicated, but there is no like obvious way leading to equality or whatever you want to call it. It's sharp, but I do think that white keeps chances for an opening advantage. To get to the second part of your question, should white start with knight g2 or bishop g5 instead because of bishop e3, c5? I don't think so. Like, if you go knight g2, black goes c5 anyway. I would still go bishop e3 probably, transposing to what we just saw. d5 is possible here, but that's, once again, sort of the logic I was trying to use earlier. This is a Benoni position where black has not yet committed to putting his knight on e5. So I don't think this is a gain. I'm not enough of an expert here to say if any of the alternatives like a6, I think Grishuk has been toying with a6 here, if that makes sense against knight g2. But I can't see that many pluses over bishop e3. Bishop g5 exists, but I think it's always been considered to be sort of okay for black. No c5, d5, neither e6 or h6. Followed by e6, you have this typical trick in many positions, that bishop h6 is well met by knight takes e4. So bishop g5, I used to play this a bit when I was younger, but I never really saw the advantage it has over bishop e3 either. So long story short, I still think white has very decent chances for an opening advantage after bishop e3, c5, knight g2, and I would not see any need to deviate. The usual disclaimer. Not a giant expert, not sure what people want here, but in the games I've seen recently, I like the positions white was getting. Hope that helped a little bit. Then we have nilsro. He's saying, "Hi Jan, thanks for all your great work on Chess24. Thank you. Consistently entertaining and informative. That's the dream. My question is about an anti-Najdorf sideline, specifically e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, 4a4. Question mark, exclaim, is that a judgment on the move? Is this a serious attempt for white at an advantage, or is it just a blitz surprise weapon? Could you briefly explain the ideas and p-word of white behind this move? Thank you in advance, nilsro. Alright, let's have a look. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check, nowadays as popular as 3d4 really. And most of the world top has shifted towards knight d7 instead of bishop d7 in this position. I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure why. I doubt if it's because of a4. I think it's more of a general feel that here in these Maroczy positions that could come up, life is not as easy as previously thought. But yeah, to get to the question, it's about the move for a4 here. I'm leaning more towards surprise weapon, but I am not sure. I think strong players have played this occasionally, like MVL and Caruana, probably in faster time controls. But yeah, the move exists. And to get to the ideas and plans, the main idea of a4 is to defend the bishop on b5, so that after it gets taken, we can recapture. Black usually does not want to take here. This pawn on b5 would be very unpleasant to deal with, because it's sort of here. Takes the good squares away from the knight, the rook gets active. a6 does not really solve this, because white can always keep this tension and black ends up with a weak pawn. So long story short, you don't want to take this. And then you could argue that if black doesn't want to take, a4 gains some space, fights against b5 in the future, and you might have the option of keeping this bishop later on after castles. Followed by rook e1, the bishop could go back to f1. So the move black chooses here is typically the knight c6 or knight f6. I like knight f6 somewhat better because of the knight c6 short castles, knight f6, rook e1. Now white is in time to drop this bishop back to f1 if needed, let's say after a6. I believe bishop c6 is an option here, but white could also just go bishop f1 and then go for the typical c3, d4 type of plans, which look reasonably playable to me. And here white should have decent chances at a bit of an advantage. Also sometimes I think they start with e6 or g6, and then white goes about his business by playing c3 and d4. When the drawback of having the pawn on a4 here is this square is a little weakened in these positions, but it does not look like it's the main factor in the position. White should still have decent chances for an advantage. The move I like better from black's perspective is to start with knight f6. The point is just that now white is not in time to both go castles and rook to e1, so that he can't then quietly build up his full pawn center with c3, d4. Not sure what people do here. I believe knight c3 is sort of the main move. You could also play d3, but it looks very meek, because now you can no longer really build a center after d3, just knight c6. Black should be fine. So I think they go knight c3 typically, and now the option of going c3, d4 is off the table, so white has to come up with something else. I liked how, once again, every question I'm talking about, Jordan Van Forest. I liked how Jordan played here. He played g6, I think, against MVL maybe. And after e5, de, knight e5, bishop g7. White might be able to grab the two bishops, but the remaining black pieces look very, very decent to me. So I thought this should be very close to equality. I think the game was something like queen f3, queen c7 takes, and can't remember how he recaptured. This looks logical to me. I could be wrong, maybe it was this way. Anyway, I think a4 is not a bad move. One idea is also after a4, if black goes a6, then you can often take here and then go a5 and fix the situation. So a6 is a little harder to manufacture at the very least before black has played knight c6. But it looks to me that after a4, knight f6, black is fine. So I would be surprised if this reaches mainline status, and I don't think it's the reason that bishop d7 is a little out of fashion. Thanks for the question. Who else do we have? We have Mr. Svartsmurf. He's saying, there is a recent book on the Colle Zuckertort, advocating 5 short castles instead of dealing with black c5, c4, with the move, with the more popular 5b3 or 5c3. It seems a nifty move order. But does white really have anything after d4, knight f6, knight 3, e6, e3, d5, bishop d3, c5, castle c4, bishop e2, b5, b3, bishop to b7? Let's have a look. d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, let's say, e3, d5, bishop d3, c5, and short castles is apparently the recommendation in that recent book on the Colle Zuckertort. Yeah, I like going c4 here. And yeah, I think that's the reason that white should start with c3 or b3. Especially b3. I've always had some sympathy for. I'm not sure if it's supposed to give white an edge or anything. But yeah, typically, me with black, I try not to allow this by not committing to e6 so quickly. But of course, it depends on your repertoire. So knight f3, e6, e3, d5, bishop d3, c5, short castles. c4 makes a lot of sense to me. c4, bishop e2, b5. And white is not in time to undermine the structure so easily, because after a4 now we can go b4, grabbing more space. So it looks fine to me, frankly. The only top game I've seen here was Kramnik versus Giri, where Giri got a good position and then went astray kind of quickly after b3, bishop b7, knight c3 was a b4, knight a4, c3, knight e5, that was the game. Here Giri made a mistake, playing some bishop d6, after which bishop b5 check, or a3, a5, bishop b5 was unpleasant. But Compi says that after queen c7, in order to meet bishop b5 with knight c6 or bishop c6, black just gets an excellent position because of this buried bishop. So yeah, I think black is fine here. The best line I could see for white was after b5, a4, b4, to play c3 here, trying to open this queenside situation before black is fully developed. When I couldn't really decide if b3 was a good move. It looks like an interesting structure, but white does get knight bd2 and e4, and I wasn't sure how to evaluate this. It's a weird situation. But it seemed like black could also just play a5, b3, bishop a6 with rough equality at least. These are some computer moves: bishop b2, cb, knight bd2, bishop d6, and computer said equal. Which, yeah, frankly, I wouldn't be very tempted to play this with white. I'd be very happy to get it with black after castle c4, b5. Such an active position with so much space on the queen side out of the opening. Looks like a good deal. And yeah, if I was white, I would. Well, c3 I'm not so sure about. c3. Who was it? I think Svidler told me that here, yeah, you delay knight c6 and you play whatever, b6, bishop b7, knight b7, bishop d6, castles, and you're just fine. Don't quote me on that, but something along those lines. c3 I was never so impressed with, but b3 I always thought was a decent system. Anyway, that's my take on this line. Yeah, this looks very fine for me, for black to me. Thanks for the question, sir. Sorry, this keeps happening. Here we are. Then we have AfuroZamurai, newly famous, the only man who has ever defeated Magnus Carlsen in a Banter Blitz game. AfuroZamurai. He's asking, too bad that I have more than one question, but to focus on a single one. After 1 c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, good old English. g3, bishop b4, bishop g2, castles, bishop c3, bc, e4, knight g5, rook e8, f3. Play could continue with e takes f3, but what I find annoying is knight e3. Even though it's not really played that often, I don't really know how to react. The pawn is pesky, and I can't get around it. What are the plans for white in this position? And my next moves would be the icing on the cake. Yeah, I should put it on the board so we can talk about it. First of all, yeah, I do agree with your evaluation that e3 is a more annoying move than e takes f3, mainly for practical reasons. By the way, speaking of Magnus Carlsen, you might have noticed that Magnus Carlsen in this position has played knight d5, I think twice recently. So as a way to avoid that, knight d5 does exist as an alternative. Bishop g2, short castles, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, pawn to e4, knight to g5, rook to e8, f3, Yeah, this line has been debated at high levels quite a bit, with some very strong players like Vishy Anand and Sergei Kayakin making this their first line of defense against the English, for a while at least. I'm not sure how things are currently. And yeah, Vishy, he's had some games on this EF3, Knight F3, D5, but people found ways to put him under some pressure here after D4. Therefore, I'm not saying it's bad, I guess, with precise play. Black holds this as well. But this looked somewhat tough for Black to play. I agree that the real test is pawn to E3. Computers really dislike D takes E3. And they say anything is fine for Black, D6, B6, whatever you choose. They say this pawn's just too weak. And they want to go D3. I find these positions very tough to navigate as well. Black goes D5. It's one of those where, even though White has the two bishops, Black should try to open the position very quickly, making use and maybe getting some support for this pawn on D5 and grabbing, ideally trying to establish some squares for his knights. Especially the D4 square after takes and C4 can often be a nice outpost for this guy. So in this position, the main move is queen to B3. Is that true? I think queen B3 is the move that's played most often. But as far as I can tell, after knight A5, they go queen A3. Both B6 and C6 lead to sort of okay positions for Black. There's all these classical games, B6, CD, knight D5, F4, bishop B7. After C4, the knight goes back. And it's not so easy to get rid of this pawn, and I always worry about the long-term security of the White king here. Not saying White is worse or anything, but it looked to me like Black was okay. There are more lines here, but overall, I thought Black had a decent position. C6 is also possible. This is some old Kasparov-Karpov thing. Takes, F4. Well, many moves. Knight C6 exists. H6, bishop G4. Very strange position. I thought that White had somewhat bad chances here to get an edge then after B6. But I wasn't convinced of that either. So the move I would probably try with White, and this is hardly a revelation either. This has been played recently by Ding and by Svidler. I might be mixing up names, but it's recently been played by good players. It's queen to A4, covering this guy without allowing knight A5 with the tempo. When play continues, something like H6, C takes D5, knight takes D5, knight to E4, and the best move I guess for Black is F5. The knight jumps to C5. And here, it's important to not allow White to play F4, freeing his bishop. So Black goes F4, and we have a horrible mess of a position where Black's setup is very, very compromised, but he's trying extremely hard to keep especially this bishop buried now. And it's a very tough position to evaluate. I have not spent a lot of time here, but I think if you have a quick look at this, after knight to E4, that this position is very playable for White, and such a mess that the better prepared player probably will have an edge. Knight E4, people go rook B8 typically, maybe preparing some B5. And the recent, I forgot if it was, I think it was Ding, maybe it was Yu Yang, not 100% sure. One of the Chinese stars. Game queen to D1 was played here, and maybe Svidler played queen A3. I wanted to move rook B1, free novelty, courtesy of whatever engine gave it, Stockfish or Lila Zero. Well, yeah, the position remains incredibly complicated and very move by movie, but I did think that White has decent chances to play for an advantage. So that's the best I got. I agree with you that these E3 lines are horribly scary and complicated and all that. And yeah, as I mentioned, knight D5 is one way to avoid them. But once you're here, after D5, queen A4 is probably what I would be trying. Hope that helps, Mr. AfuroZamurai. Then we have Henry0813. He's asking, what is the best move order to trick a King's Indian defense player? I'm assuming the key ID stands for King's Indian defense. And not a very young player. There was this recent viral whatever tweet about some chess players' notes. I must kill the key ID. His girlfriend got scared. I think it was fake. But a lot of humor to be had around key ID, meaning both Kit and King's Indian defense. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but I have an idea because it's a topic that's been on my mind throughout my entire chess career. How to annoy these guys that just want to play knight f6, g6, bishop g7 in all the d4 openings. And the truth is, it's hard to move order them. Because yeah, if people want to fight for the center, play the Grunfeld or something, then you have options. But if black just wants to go d4, knight f6, followed by g6, bishop g7, that's very hard to avoid. So there's two things that I've been doing on and off. One is this move instead of c4, when the point is after bishop g7, which most King's Indian players would play. You go e4 and you don't play with c4. Well, they play d6 and here bishop d3, bishop b5 check is also interesting, bishop d3, castles, castles, stuff like that. When you get sort of a Peert's position that most King's Indian players won't like as much as the King's Indian. The drawback is of course that black can play d5 here, to which yeah, typically you want to play e3 followed by b4, stuff like that, or that they can play c5, which yeah, I think is the biggest problem after dc, queen a5, a3 takes, something like this. Black should be reasonably close to equality, but it's not something that King's Indian players like that much. So that's one, but the one I really like, and one that I'm using very rarely, I have to admit, but if you can tell that your opponent will play the King's Indian against anything, I really like starting with 1g3, and exactly with 1g3, because these King's Indian guys, they will play either knight f6 or g6 followed by knight f6, and after this, here you can go e4, they go d6, you go d4, they go bishop g7, you go knight e2. Once again, we've delayed c4 and we've sort of move ordered them into some type of Peert's that not all King's Indian players will be very comfortable with. Even if they are comfortable with it, I think this is a very, very playable line for white. After e5, white goes knight bc3, then you want to go h3, bishop e3, maybe g4 on a good day, a4 to stop black from a6, or c6, b5. So this is, yeah, very decent position. And I think knight bd7 intending to play c5 is popular, but then you don't commit to knight c3 yet. You go h3, c5, c3. You say, haha, the knight is a bit misplaced on d7. So yeah, this is a move that I like against these guys that have the King's Indian blinders on. Of course, black can do many a thing. He can play d5 or e5 here, after which we have to transpose the other stuff like d5, knight f3 is the Rati, e5, c4 is the English. But many King's Indian players, they will play knight f6, g6 here, or g6 immediately. After g6 immediately, bishop g2, bishop g7, it's a little trickier, because here if we go e4, then they might go c5, and we get sort of a version of the Sicilian. That's not so great. But here you can start with d4, and once again, most King's Indian players will not play d5 or c5 here, but will play d6 or knight f6, and we are back to our mean scheme. I have no idea if that's what you were looking for at all, or if you just meant what's the best line against the King's Indian. But I'm always into the topic of trying to move other people out of their comfort zone. Of course, this is the King's Indian, where we talked about the Saemisch earlier, and there's a million other systems as well. But I hope I got your question right, and you did enjoy the 1g3 idea. Maybe not. Anyway, thanks for asking. Wow, more King's Indian action. KingWang is saying, I've always played the King's Indian defense, but never liked it. Why have you then? Any suggestions for what I should try instead? Ideally, it would be something which can give attacking chances. Yes, I realize that isn't always possible with black, but isn't quite as all or nothing as the mainline King's Indian defense. Yeah, that's a variation of a question that we more or less get in most opening clinics. The problem is I never have a great answer, because the question is basically, I want a system against 1d4 that gives me active play, but that is not positionally suspect. And that's a tough situation. A wish that everybody has, but white does move first, and it's not easy to get attacking chances or dynamic play without giving up something. So let's go through the options. KingWang mentioned he's no longer a fan of the King's Indian defense, but that is of course high on the list if people want active play or attacking chances. The King's Indian, especially the main lines. Stuff like this. You give up some space, but you do get attacking chances later on. Which, as KingWang also mentioned, is not easy in many openings after 1d4. The King's Indian has two, I would say, relatives in spirit, where black says, okay, I'm willing to give up some space or some center, trying to get attacking chances later. One is the Leningrad Dutch after d4, f5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, you play g6, let's say c4, bishop g7, knight c3, castles, knight f3, d6. The plus is the pawn is already on f5, so if black ever gets e5 and gets this rolling, he will have a good central control, but typically at some point, let's say here, d5 is not necessarily the best move, but at some point white will play d5 and make it a little less appealing for black to go e5 at the very least, allowing him to take en passant. But still, the Leningrad Dutch is very much an option if you're looking for sharp play. I've been on the record many times as not a big fan, but I do recognize that it is an option, trying to complicate the game. If you start with 1f5, you have the additional headaches that some of the sidelines here are very, very decent moves, like knight c3, preparing e4, or bishop g5 is also very interesting. So there is the Leningrad Dutch, that's an alternative. The third, I would say, in that family is the Benoni / Benko. c4, c5, if they go d5, you go e6, knight c3, e d, c d, d6, e4, g6. We've seen Fabiano Caruana win a fantastic game with this as black the other day against Yu-Mamedyarov in the Grand Chess Tour in Paris, in this line with b5 here. Caruana also played it recently against Kayakin, I think in the last round of Zagreb maybe. Got a bad position there, and after the games, yeah, this Benoni is such a terrible opening that it's not for everyday use, and in a way it's even more committal than the King's Indian, because you give up so much space and center that, yeah, strategically, of course, you are taking big risks. In that family is also the Benko Gambit, which nowadays, I guess, is not so much in fashion anymore, because some of these lines, like e3 or ba6, have turned out to be hard for black to handle. But it's another opening in the same spirit. So those are the sharpest options trying to unbalance the game. Then there is the Grunfeld. The Grunfeld, of course, very theoretical. Recently has been under some more fire than it has been for some years, because the likes of Magnus have started winning some games in main lines here on the white side, or at least posing some problems. But the Grunfeld does exist. It's active, it's quite theory heavy, very dynamic, very move by move. I'm not sure I can promise attacking chances, but as we've established, that's hard to do. And then there are the more classical openings. This is, yeah, what I do typically. Knight f6, e6. I've done a bunch of video series about my black repertoire. When after knight c3 you want to play the nilsro. The nilsro can lead to anything. Attacking chances, non-attacking chances, quiet play, sharp play. It's just a very sound, healthy opening. And after knight f3, you have three options. Bishop b4 check, the so-called Bogo Indian, which if it goes well, sometimes you can get some attacking chances, but typically it doesn't go that well and you don't get those. But on a good day, you can get some, I don't know, I might have messed up the move order, but some sort of King's Indian without the dark bishops. However, warning, there are like 10,000 alternatives along the way. Knight c3 and a3 being two of them, and knight bd2, another very serious one. So there's that. There is the Queen's Indian, b6, never refuted, leads to more positional maneuvering play. And there's the move d5, which I prefer. When after knight c3, you can choose your system. c6, the Semi-Slav, and bishop b4. The Ragozin are in very good health. I like the Vienna, which is very sharp, leading to move-by-move play. And there are also moves like a6, c5, knight bd7, and so on and so forth. So here, there's something for everyone's taste. The big drawback of knight f6, e6 are all these pesky Catalan players. This is a question we've had earlier in the show. The Catalan exists, and it's very hard to generate attacking or winning or sharpening chances, for me at least. But it's the price you have to pay for playing a very sound opening in the center. In a similar family, I would say, is the Slav, which can also lead to all kinds of things. After knight c3, dc4, you can also play e6 here. One drawback with the Slav, of course, is that white, if he wants to, can get a symmetrical position here early on. But even that position, I do think there's enough life. There is no reason to discard Slav completely. There's also the Queen's Gambit accepted, which can lead to all types of positions, but typically not attacking chances. And yeah, I think this is the list of mainline openings. I'm sure I forgot some, so apologies to that. And I don't mean the Chigorin or the Albans counter Gambit. But yeah, those are your options. The three first ones are the ones with the biggest potential to get dynamic attacking chances. But they're also the biggest ones with the biggest potential to be positionally worse. And then, you know, the sounder it is, the harder it is to create attacking chances, which it's a real slippery slope. Sorry, I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think anybody has. You can also play multiple openings according to the situation. Play the King's Indian against that guy and the Slav against that other guy. It's tough, but I hope I gave you a bit of an overview of what is out there and what's not. What else do we have? DrBoki saying, in the last Norway chess, Yu Yang beat Yu-Mamedyarov in the 4 knights variation you gave in your fantastic as usual latest series. Thank you. Do you think this is a problem for black? Feedmaster DrBoki. No, because Yu-Mamedyarov did not play what I was recommending, right? Let's put it on the board to make myself clear. Oops. So the 4 knights, e4, e5, let's say knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. And yeah, after I did the series, there were a bunch of games, especially in the Scottish 4 knights, d4, ed, knight d4, bishop b4, takes, bishop d3. And I gave this, well, not really new, but somewhat rare idea after castles, not to recapture here, but instead play the move bishop g4. I was very happy that Peter Svidler was able to use it in his tournament in Israel and defeat Luke McShane in a very nice game after this bishop g4. But the line that DrBoki is asking about is the one with f3, bishop h5, bishop g5, which I also considered the critical one. And in that game, mentioned Yu-Mamedyarov played queen d6, which might be an alright move too. I have to admit I haven't really checked it all that much. What I wanted was to just go c takes d5 here. And yeah, there was some theory to it, which I think I all gave in the video series. So yeah, okay. I guess not much point repeating it all here. Watch the video, ideally. But yeah, I'm not sure. Queen d6, as Yu-Mamedyarov played, might also be a very viable choice. I hadn't looked at it much, but if I recall correctly, the computer also seemed to think this was fine. And this is the game: bishop f6, queen f6, knight e4, queen b2, dc6, bishop g6, king h1, queen d4, queen e2, rook fe8, and only started complaining about this rook fe8 move while it said whatever, rook a8. And black is very much in business, but I thought that c takes d5 was a cleaner solution, with some theory after knight takes d5 or bishop takes f6. I want to point you to that video series I did, where I gave some more lines. Anyway, thanks for the question, DrBoki, but no, I do think that the line is still in pretty good health. Then we have Mr. Tapu. He's saying, "Hi Jan, I am 2300 rated, and recently I have been troubles in facing the Semi-Slav opening as white. Because if you are not fully updated in a particular line, you can easily get worse position. Wow. After d4, d5, c4, c6, you can't play exchange variation as your main weapon." Not sure, but yeah, okay. I also looked at Avruch's suggestion in his book, but in 6 bishop e4 and 9 bishop e7, black seems to be holding quite well. I think I know what you mean in, well, we'll put it on the board in a minute, in knight f3, e3 business. I can play the Maran or anti-Maran with queen c2, but recent sources seem to give the verdict that black is doing fine in the complicated positions, which is not everyone's cup of tea. Do you have a suggestion on a particular variation to look at, or any good source, like books or DVDs to recommend? Thanks for your kind attention. Not really, to be perfectly frank, but I do think that's a completely normal situation. Or life as a white player. You mentioned the Semi-Slav, but you could pretty much make the case for really any mainline opening, like let's say the Ragozin or Catalan with bishop b4 check, or really anything. The nilsro. I don't think anybody will have something that works every game. It comes back to the point I made earlier that in most mainlines, black will be okay long term. So what I typically do is I try to be very flexible with white, while with black I think it's okay to have a fixed repertoire. And yeah, whatever. You can play the Semi-Slav or the mainline Slav or the Ragozin and so on and so forth. But with black, since I believe normally lines hold for black, you can stick to stuff. Well, with white, I also keep dancing around. So let's go through stuff you mentioned. Yeah, I've played quite a fair bit of exchange Slav. I don't think it's worse than any other line, frankly. Like, I do think that after a6, typically white gets pretty decent chances to play for an edge. I do think that bishop f5 should be holding for black, but even here, there are quite some interesting tries. Queen b3, knight f3, followed by queen b3. So yeah, I don't really think that it can't be played. But I do agree, of course, that if black knows what he's doing, he should be fine. But I do think that about the other lines as well. So knight f3, you mentioned knight f6. I'm not sure I got that part, but I'm assuming it was something along these lines. How does this go? No, an expert here. Queen c7, bishop d2. I just recall you mentioned 9 bishop e7. Not sure it was here. Sorry, I don't know this stuff well. Looks like a playable position for white to me as well. But yeah, I haven't touched this for a number of years, mainly for practical reasons. After bishop f5, knight c3 is also a6. There is bishop g4 in this position. And there is bishop f5, knight c3, e6, knight h4, bishop g6, which I also don't know if it's bad. And there is e6, so I never felt like I was saving all that much with that move order. So what else did you mention? Knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3, knight b7. You say, yeah, you can play the queen c2 lines, but don't really like them. Where, yeah, I don't have any groundbreaking ideas in these either. It's very much a matter of taste here. Recently, I think Geary recently played b3, castles bishop e2, which leads to quiet play, where you can never really be worse, but I'll admit that black is pretty solid. There are also some experiments with how does this go, bishop e2, castles, castles without b3, trying to make it harder for black to play these e5 lines, which are sort of equalizing after bishop d3, castles, castles. So yeah, that's what people are doing, but I'm not going to argue that anything is winning. I very often play bishop d3 here, when black is also okay, of course, but it forces them into positions that aren't seen that often anymore these days, and sometimes you can catch people off guard, like most of them play this system with b5, bishop d6, and as mentioned, black is alright if he knows his stuff, but I like going here once in a while. Then obviously, but I'm aware you know all this, but I don't have a refutation of the Semi-Slav, and I don't think anybody has. Obviously, there's also bishop g5, after which you have to be ready for different systems, like d takes c4, the Botvinnik, which is shaky, but exists, or h6, after which if you're well prepared and willing to put in a lot of work, I do think that even nowadays one can still go bishop h4, dc, e4, g5, and lead these discussions. But this does require a lot of work, and here white could very easily be worse if things go a little wrong. There's also bishop takes f6, of course, queen f6. This is a lot less risky, and now the usual suspects, queen b3, e3, and so on and so forth. So long story short, be flexible. I don't think there's one line that works all the time. You can still do it. I don't think the exchange Slav is bad. I don't think knight f3, e3 is bad. I very often also play knight c3, knight f6, e3, just somewhat trying to move over the guys who maybe don't play the Semi-Slav. But if you know it's a Semi-Slav guy who plays e6 anyway, that won't help so much. I sometimes also fool around with move orders like this, if you have a feeling. This might get your opponent sort of out of book. You can try that, or you can say, maybe g3 here. Maybe that's not their cup of tea. The moral of the story is, Semi-Slav is a good opening. Most main lines are good openings. I don't have any way to put pressure, but I hope I give some, at least how I think about these things, and some way. Some things to try. Sorry that I could not give you the refutation. I don't have it, Tapu. Alright, let's do one more question and then get out of here. And what question could that be? What about Mr. MasterGambit? He's saying, is the Cambrige Springs defense refuted, or why it's not seen in top chess anymore? And I guess a couple factors. So let's put the Cambrige Springs on the board. One day I'll not mess this up. Many different move orders to get there. Oops, sorry. So the Cambrige Springs is knight b7, e3, and queen to a5. I don't think it's refuted necessarily, but it does give, first of all, it gives white a lot of options, and all of those are somewhat dangerous. And secondly, black has been doing kind of alright with the alternatives. We just had this position on the board in the last question, especially h6, I think has been holding up pretty well, and therefore maybe not, black players didn't feel the need to go to the Cambrige Springs on a regular basis. It should also be said that a lot of white players do not really dare to play bishop g5, because as I just mentioned, you need to be ready for the Botvinnik, for h6, and for the Cambrige Springs. So it's something you need to be quite prepared for with white. So after knight b7, first of all, white could go cd5 here, but typically people don't. They play e3 and queen a5. hinting at some knight e4. This is the Cambrige Springs. Yeah, I'm not aware of a refutation, but there are some lines that maybe black doesn't enjoy all that much. cd5 is one of the main moves. Knight takes d5. Here rook c1 has been fashionable when it's not completely obvious, to me at least, how black should be playing. I think they've mainly been going knight c3, bc, bishop a3, rook c2, b6, something like this. That was his famous game, but I don't know. Was it Tomaszewski won a nice game after some bishop e2 here? But I also thought bishop d3 gives white some chances for an opening advantage. So there's this line. There's the old line with queen to d2, which I think is still doing alright for black, but it's also not exactly a walk in the park. And there are also quite some developments in the other main move, knight to d2, just stopping knight to e4. When dc bishop f6 has always been considered to be a bit better for white. So the main move after knight d2 is bishop b4. White has been experimenting with rook c1, offering this pawn. That's a very, very hot pawn to take. And I think after rook c1, white has decent chances as well. But I also like the old school line, queen c2 here. How does this go? Castles, bishop e2, c5. What do they play? They play some subtle move here, bishop f4 or something. I think it was bishop f4 here. And it wasn't easy for black to equalize either. So, long story short, refuted might be too strong, but it does seem like a very unnecessary enterprise to try to defend the Cambrige Springs territory, where white has so many dangerous tries. Both knight d2 and c takes d5 seem to give very serious chances. If you want a lazy option, you can even go bishop takes f6. I think Grishuk did that recently. Knight f6, bishop d3, followed by short castles, which is also not ridiculous. So yeah, Cambrige Springs. I'm frankly not expecting a big comeback. I don't think it's losing or anything, but it's a strange way to play. No, like I understand it looks appealing, queen a5, and we threaten stuff, but we still put our queen on the edge of the board on move number 6, and white has found ways to fight for the initiative at least. CD and knight d2, both somewhat unpleasant. So that was a long-winded way saying, I don't know. But actually no, I do think that in both these lines, white does get fairly decent chances for an opening advantage. Therefore, it's somewhat logical to me that it's not played very often at the highest level. So, that was my rambling about chess openings. I hope some of the stuff might have been a little useful for you. It's always very useful for me to do these shows because I have to think about the questions, and I also get, or maybe not also, maybe just I get a lot of information from getting questions, and the Chess24 members have been asking some very smart questions over all these years, so keep them coming. Thanks for doing so, and see you in the next episode where I will tackle the next 10 questions. I can't count till 10, so I'm not sure how many those were. But I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.